Hey, nothing is wrong.
No, you're
we made Seth panic. Okay. So again, I'm Naomi Harris, and it was my pleasure to chair BOSC 2024. Hilmar, I'm talking. Okay. And I wanted to thank all the people who made BOSC possible, ISCB and particularly Seth, who has been super helpful. Thank you, Seth. And our organizing committee and review committee, all of whom volunteer their time to help run BOSC, all of the presenters and participants, and our sponsors, of course. This is our organizing committee, and we have 6 of us here in person, and everyone has been a tremendous help. So if you see them around, you can thank them. And the review committee as well gave a lot of time and energy to giving very careful and constructive feedback on the submitted abstracts. I think our reviewers always go above and beyond with the work that they do in reviewing. And we also have our review process openly documented on our GitHub, and we welcome comments on that. And I wanted to thank again our great sponsors, Sakara, who are responsible for these socks. If any of the presenters didn't get socks, we have a few left here, so please be sure you get some. And we also have platinum sponsor Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, the NIH Office of Data Science Strategy, and GigaScience are our other sponsors. So thank you to all of these sponsors for helping us make BOSC wonderful and more accessible. As I've mentioned, most of the sponsorship funds go toward giving free registration to presenters, and this year 13 people from underrepresented groups got free registration thanks to our sponsors. Tonight we have a casual dinner at Le Central Food Court, and I spec'd out, there's like a brew pub that's just on the right-hand side as you approach the Le Central. And if it's not raining, we can eat outside there. You can buy drinks there, and then you can go to any of the food places inside the mall. If it's raining, which it may be, we can eat inside, and the landmark that I chose there is that green chom chom sign. And there's a bunch of big tables there. So look for your BOSC friends there tonight around 7 p.m. And once again, we encourage you to keep in touch all year, not just while we're here. And if you go to our webpage, our website, any of the footers have these links to join the conversation with us. One more reminder about the CoFest, the collaborative work event that starts tomorrow nearby in Montreal. And this is also on our website, and Hervé Ménager is running that. So we thank him for that. You can find him if you have questions. And with that, that's the end of my closing remarks. So now we get the panel, and at the end, you don't have to have me up here again. So that's the bonus. So do we have all of our panelists in the room to come up here?
Yes, I'll call them.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome back to BOSC. I'm Mónica Muñoz Torres, and I'm an associate professor of biomedical informatics at the School of Medicine in the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. It is my immense pleasure to welcome our panelists today. They will introduce themselves as the panel goes. First, I have a little bit of logistics. Andrew, Barry, Melanie, Thomas, could I kindly ask you that you please give verbal consent to be recorded during the panel?
Yes.
Thank you. Cheers. You got it. It's become a bit of a tradition to come in and have a little bit of a discussion as we summarize the events of the 2 days that brings us into BOSC. And so we have fantastic keynote speakers. We had great talks throughout, and now we're going to grab all of that information and try to condense and pick their brains a little further into getting a little bit more into the topic of our panel. we know that there's still a need for powerful analytical tools. It's been greater now. It's never been greater. And what I want us to do during the panel, as you ask questions, as you think about this and ask our panelists, is to dive into the open source AI ML world so that we can explore its potential to revolutionize biological information analysis. The shift that occurred towards open source bioinformatics promised and I truly believe has delivered in great part an era of transparency, of collaboration, faster innovation, and implementing open source practices for artificial intelligence and machine learning and deploying this comes as a natural progression of this open source movement. So we think this is important. It helps us to democratize access. It helps us to accelerate discovery, but it also has its challenges. Andrew and Melanie spoke about these challenges yesterday and today. Open models rely on public available data. There could be some limitations on diversity, on biases that are introduced, and there could also be constraints regarding the ability to pursue funding and achieve funding for computational analysis, for instance. So over the course of the next hour or so, a little bit less than that, we will go over a few questions. I will start us off with an icebreaker so that you get a feeling for the dynamics. And then our panelists respond, not all four at a time, but one or two of them, so that we have the possibility of bringing in a lot more questions. So please have a think about this open source AI/ML, whether it's a game changer for bioinformatics, and start preparing your questions. You can come up to the mic. If you have a piece of paper, you can write them out, and I'm happy to read them. I believe Karsten's online on the Juno platform, so you can write Q&A in there as well, and then we'll be trying to address as many questions as possible. For the next 12 minutes, our panelists are going to introduce themselves briefly, and that's why I'm not introducing you. So please take it away, Thomas.
Okay, thank you so much, Monica. I'm Thomas Mbois. I'm a researcher in residence at the Expertise Center of AI here in Montreal. But my presence here will be mostly related to my practical work in Cameroon with the biohacker space I founded called the Mbois Lab in 2017. I think from my experience trying to develop local solution, working in synthetic biology and in digital fabrication, then the shift to the AI in 2020 with practical work in biology. I think I will share with you some point, but I strongly believe that combining AI, responsible AI, and open source is a powerful tool specifically for low resources context in terms of accelerating biology and diagnostics. Yes, thank you. Thank
you. Dr. Thomas Mbois works here in Montreal, hails from Cameroon, I believe. And I wanted to share that the four panelists are sitting at a long table. Dr. Mbois sits with a beige color blazer and glasses. And next to him is Melanie Courteau, who sports short blonde hair and glasses with a burgundy coat. Please.
All right, thanks, Moni. Thanks, Thomas, for the intro. Hi, so I'm Melanie Courteau. If you were here for the first day of BOSC, you've heard me talk about some of the ideas and the concerns I have around AI and OpenAI and LLM and what's going to happen to us as humans. I work at OICR, the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research. So we do a lot of cancer genomics. So there's all the consideration around private data, confidential patient data. So that's also something, we're talking about open source and open data. Should all the data be open? For the data that's not open, how do we handle that? Some of the things that I'm particularly concerned about is the data and the data quality that we're leveraging when we run, whether it's AI, ML, or any other automated classifier or anything like that. With LLMs in particular, Andrew was showing us this morning the amount of data that we can actually handle. So is there that self-fulfilling loop that I was talking about. Are we going to start erasing data, rewriting the data history, become one of those ministry of truth where, we just rewrite what we actually want to see? So maybe that's something that, as data generator and manipulator, we need to think about. So I think, I'd be interested in talking about responsible and understandable AI, which I think Thomas is an expert in, data quality, and how can we handle privacy and confidentiality in an open source context.
Thank you, Melanie. To the left of Melanie sits Dr. Larry Hunter with a playful, beautiful set of curls and a black shirt with white markings.
I was wondering how you were going to handle this. This is traditional Hawaiian markings, by the way.
Beautiful.
I'm Larry Hunter. I'm about to start as a professor in the School of Medicine at the University of Chicago. I spent 20 some odd years at the University of Colorado, and before that was at NIH. I graduated with a PhD in AI right at the last AI winter in the late 80s and early 1990s. So I have some experience with the hype cycle. And I like to think that with my advanced age and horrible experiences, I can bring some moderate perspectives to keep people from panicking, but still take advantage of the opportunities that we have. And I guess if I were going to lay out a piece of ideology to direct our thinking, I might, and this is it's not my idea originally, but and I'm not sure whose it was. It circulated as a meme, so it's a little hard to track down the provenance. It's a problem for all y'all. But I want AI to do the dishes and the laundry so that I can write stories and make music rather than the other way around. And I think in science we can do that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of language models in creativity and what we might be able to get out of them productively. Some worries about the need to use open ones and the problems with using closed language model systems, even though the open ones might not be quite as performant in some ways. It is possible to do science with them, and I will argue in a few minutes, I think, that it's actually impossible to do science with the closed models because there's too many important things we don't know about, and it's okay to report on them, but it is not adequate just to report on them. And I think I'll let it go for that.
Thank you, Larry. And last but not least, to the left of Larry sees Dr. Andrew Su. He is also in the United States as Larry, and he's wearing a polo shirt with a purple tint and glasses.
Thanks. Right, so my name is Andrew Su. I'm a professor at Scripps Research in San Diego. My lab is really interested in bioinformatics methods. We have a long-standing history in open source software, less so in sort of AI, but of course we're trying to do sort of a crash course and get up to speed. I think we will always be more on the side of applications as opposed to developing. I have the challenge of trying to say something unique relative to the esteemed colleagues to my right. And perhaps the only thing I'll add just as sort of a basis is sort of the role of I think the need and the role of education in all this, because I think there is, not only among sort of AI practitioners, but also in terms of sort of the broader public and how these findings that are based on AI can be properly contextualized and interpreted.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you all for your introductions. A point of technical, these microphones are very good at capturing voice at 45-degree angles, so you don't have to bring them too close. They actually get a little bit of reverb if you do. I just learned that from Seth. Okay, so we'll start with the first question to Carrie for as many of you as you'd like to share. I'm wondering if you can start us off with some outlook on what are the most exciting opportunities that you see the concept of open source AI ML can bring for future research. If you would like to share some insight on that, and who would like to start?
I think that's a question for Andrew, based on all the Mentimeter survey.
You've been voluntold,
Don't
Andrew.
pull that up again, but no. I'll defer to others.
Sure, I'm happy. The most exciting for me is, the impact it's going to have on all of us. So when Andrew was doing the survey this morning, I was trying to think about 10 years in the future. I'm like, oh, it's going to be great. We're going to have precision medicine. We're going to know exactly what's happening with the environment. We're going to have solutions for agriculture, climate change. It's going to be amazing. And then, we were talking about some of the issues with models, AI, the data coming in. I'm like, hey, is it going to be amazing? So really excited about seeing what's going to happen. I think there's a huge potential for, betterment of humankind, but there's also a huge potential for risk and challenges. And because you're asking for the positive, I will focus on the positive, and I will say I think there's really an opportunity to handle the data tsunami, to cite the data, everything that's happening. There's really an opportunity to handle that data, make something amazing with it. And I'm really looking forward to it. There's a potential it goes wrong, but positive.
Cheers.
All right, well, so in the spirit of the laundry and dishes remark, what I'm excited by is actually sort of the more routine uses of language models to make our work less painful and more efficient. And I can think of a variety of ways that things that can happen. So often for my own use, when I want a quick summary of some gene or field or something that I don't know that much about, where I used to turn to Wikipedia, I now sometimes turn to a language model for a quick summary of something. And it's particularly the case when there isn't a simple idea that was likely to have a single Wikipedia entry, but a somewhat more complicated thing that I want some background on. I find it useful for that. In my lab, I have occasionally encouraged students who are not native speakers of English and have some issue with writing to take their draft manuscripts and ask a language model to rephrase them or improve the English, and then look at them and try and learn from that, not just blindly submit, but actually try and learn about that. And I think that that's likely to work. There have been two, as far as I know, really good large-scale studies of the applications of language models in real work situations. And the first one's about 6 months old from the National Bureau of Economic Research, which looked at the application of large language model in a phone technical support application for software product. Rolled it out. There were, I forget the exact number, but hundreds of employees. And over the period of the study, the productivity of that helpline went up by about 20%, not quite, high double digits, 17, 18%. And that's meaningful. But if you break it down a little further, what was interesting to me was the people who were the least productive before the introduction of the language model got the biggest benefit. So the ones that took the longest time to look up the answer and to report back on what it was got a significant improvement. The top quintile, the people who were in the top 20%, actually had a minor decrement in their performance. It took them longer when they had to use the language model, but overall for the entire population, it went up some. So, and furthermore, one other interesting thing about the study is when they took the language model away, it was a 30-day experiment, the people who were at that low level continued to show improved performance. They learned what the appropriate answers were, and they remembered them, and they could generate them themselves without having to use the language model. So I think that's a nice way of thinking about how can we put these things to use in a way that kind of lifts all boats, being aware of some of the consequences. And I'm not sure exactly what the applications in science would be to look like that, but I think there are some.
Thank you, Larry. I don't yet see people lining up or questions online, so I would like to ask Thomas and Andrew to share the opportunities of, what are the opportunities that this can afford, that open AI ML can afford for biological research. Thomas, would you like to share some thoughts?
Yes, so I see good potential in terms of collaboration and acceleration of research, because from what I know in the realm of open science or open source, all our action everywhere. So depending of where we can have a consequence. And one positive consequence is the collaboration, how our action can contribute to the democratization of sciences, or science or biology. If I take the case of GitHub as a platform, how GitHub or GitLab, depending on what you are using, have facilitated our work in Cameroon just because you have access to all these open repository. You can reproduce very complex experiment related to synthetic biology, for example, from Cameroon, just because you have all the protocol available. I think it's a good opportunity for collaboration and acceleration, because synthetic biology is something that when you are looking at our capacity, technical infrastructure, and so on, something that we are not really able to do from Cameroon, but we succeed in doing this kind of research and experiment. So that is what I can say from the Cameroonian context.
Thank you, Thomas.
Maybe one use case that I think is exciting from my perspective is sort of the curation assistance, right? So I think, in my keynote, I talked a little bit about how we're interested in utilizing the structured resources from the LLMs, or the resource of the LLMs, but sort of the reverse of that, using LLMs to help populate the structured resources. I think there's sort of still value and use cases associated with that. And so that's also something that we're looking at in terms of, trying to construct focused knowledge graphs, for example, in specific areas.
Thank you, Andrew. A little more to your right, and you'll see the microphone. And one step more to your right. There you go.
So I want to, thinking about the last few days, we've heard a lot about some of the ways that the use of LLMs in general, and even in some cases open LLMs, thinking about Melanie's talk, could actually be somewhat detrimental in terms of equity. So I want to hear the other side of that coin a little bit as well. So I'm wondering if you can give us one way in which the use of open LLMs and open data in open bioinformatics sphere could increase equity for the people who benefit from that use, and maybe one case where it will potentially, if we're not careful, decrease equity for who benefits from that science.
Sure, thanks, Andrew. So I think, I think Larry touched a little bit on open versus closed LLMs. So I see open LLMs as a fantastic opportunity in terms of anyone can use them and run them and try them, and it works or it doesn't work. But you can try a series of LLMs, as nowadays there's APIs where you can just switch the model in the back end, and so that's a huge opportunity in terms of trying different things, and that means that you also have those tiny and smaller models that anyone could start using on their laptops, which means in terms of increasing equity and access to resources, you can think about countries who have lower infrastructure or resources available, and you can take your laptop. It's maybe a little bit slow, but you can take that laptop and you can actually use the model. So in terms of increasing equity by increasing access to the technology, I think there's a fantastic opportunity for open models in particular. And then your second question was around where it could,
Where it could do harm.
Where it could do harm.
You just said it benefits.
Yeah. Do you want to take the harm?
No, I want to say one more good thing.
Okay.
Then I can come up with some harms. So I like thinking about them really as language technology. So one place that I think LLMs have a really important role in improving equity is in lesser resourced languages. So the machine translation works much better than it ever has. LLMs are an important part of that, and it makes the scientific literature available to people who speak lesser resourced languages. And I think that's really important. And so machine translation generally, but LLM-based machine translation in particular is important. And also I mentioned briefly before, the flip side of that, helping authors whose first language isn't necessarily English improve the quality of their manuscripts. So just thinking of it as language technology, I think gives us some insight into one way it might help improve equity. I'm a little less convinced about access. It's still too expensive, but maybe that's a downside piece, that if everybody gets used to it and it costs $20 a month, $20 a month is not so much to a North American lab. maybe a lot more to a lab in the less rich part of the world.
Yeah, so when I was a student and starting my career, there was that really sequencing technologies were taking up, and it was the time at which you could take like a USB key-like sequencer and plug it in your laptop. And I had a colleague, Nick Lohman in the UK in particular, was traveling the world and sequencing on site, and I think I've been really inspired for that. So I guess that's what I'm hoping to see with those. So
The open source ones might be free on my laptop. It could happen.
I'm hopeful.
Other thoughts?
May I add something?
Please.
Yeah, okay. Yes, I think I recognize this, the potential in terms of participation and contribution that OpenLLM provide. But the other side, I think I just like to show some example in terms of harms. And, the other side is when we look at the level of contribution of people, for example, based in low and middle income countries, I think the level of knowledge they can contribute in all these data set and so on is not the same that people are contributing across the world. And we documented this issue in the past through a project that we did in Francophone Africa and in Haiti. And we believe that it's what we call cognitive injustice. And these cognitive injustices are not coming just from the most important of them are coming from the inner, from our local issue, where we don't have, if you decide to count the number of people using LLM in Cameroon, for example, we don't have a critical mass. So it means that they cannot contribute as much as we want, so that our knowledge are also available on the internet, as they can change the narrative around our countries, our diseases, and so on. So that is, I think, is something that we need to, is an arm, but we need to try to target it from the inner, from our context, I think, because I strongly believe that the technology is open, so it's up to everyone to try to embrace, to develop new skills and adopt in our day-to-day practice. But locally, we are lacking a critical mass, and the consequence is that there's a lot of biases when we want to talk about different contexts rather than North America and Europe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have been thinking about the possibilities. You know, you touched a little bit on the possible challenges, the reliance on public data, the fact that there might be some lack of diversity in the data themselves, the challenges with being able to run these resources because you don't have sufficient funds to be able to do this. So these are all challenges that are posed to the utilization of open AI ML resources. How do you think some of those how can we affect some change? What could be done to maybe change some of those things, the reliance on the publicly available data, the biases, all of these different challenges? Does anybody want to go first and share some thoughts?
I'll take a stab, because I was thinking a lot, Moni, about your analogy to open source software, right? And I think open source software made a lot of sense, because we could, right, the primary ingredient, right, the effort involved is human effort, right? And so given enough people and expertise, right, we can approximate a lot of sort of previously commercial software. But with, I just wonder whether or not in the AI space, where, for example, right, especially the closed models of LLMs, right? I mean, it's impractical, right, to do that in an open source way, or at best we'll get subsets of that data. And even the open source models where the weights in the models, right? It's still the underlying training data is still often closed, right? And so that makes it difficult to introspect as far as what the potential biases are in there, for example. So I find it difficult because to think of the solution there, because again, it seems like in contrast to software, where the primary ingredient is human effort, right? There's a lot more sort of resource intensivity that would be difficult to replicate in open context.
I respectfully disagree.
Finally.
We were getting really boring. So I want to make 2 points. And one is going to be Coles to Newcastle. I don't think you could do science of a certain kind on closed models. If you don't know what the training data was, you can't analyze what the influence of various aspects of that training data was on the model. If you want to investigate the sources of bias in the data, you have to know the training data, right? So there's a whole bunch of scientific questions about language models that cannot be answered in a closed context. So if we're going to make progress on addressing some of these issues, if we're going to understand how the models are, what are the influences of training data on the outputs, how can we make models that run faster, use fewer resources, train faster, those kind of questions require open models. By the way, I guess this is the moment to do it. I want to drop the bomb that I have about why not to use closed models. And that is not just because we don't know what's in them, but because they are actively working against our interests. So remember how many billions of dollars have been invested in companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and the like, okay? Those investors are not doing it for our benefit. They are doing it for return on that investment. And as far as I can tell, the subscription model helps a little bit, but the real payoff, like every other piece of payoff in tech, is advertising. So the answers you're going to get out of large language models will increasingly be purchased by advertisers who want to deliver a message to you. Okay, that is no way to do science, all right? We can't even tell that they're there. We won't know what the consequences were. It will drive them towards commercial utility and away from objectivity in science. So we have to come up with some way of dealing with the fact that the incentives of the closed providers do not align with the incentives of scientists. And I think the way to do that is openness. And the place I want to disagree with you is I think we can get there with open models. It may take longer. I think what we need, to answer your question, is patience. The open models are likely to lag behind the performance of the closed models, but not by that much. Current open models are better than ChatGPT 3.5 for a lot of applications. It didn't take that long to catch up. And so I think we need to be patient and use open models.
But open models in terms of being able to see the weights, or open models
including the data. And maybe there will be places where we cannot do that, although I don't think they're going to be that important scientifically. The main one is actually with these video generative models. So most of the video generative models that are happening are being trained on YouTube data. Certainly all of Google's are, and there was a cross-licensing agreement. So it looks like a lot of the video training is going to be on YouTube data, and that's copyrighted and you can't have it. So I'm not sure what we're going to do about open video models, but for the language models, plenty of open data. And in fact, there's some evidence that performance of models trained on high quality language data, trained on PubMed Central or journal articles, even much smaller models in terms of the amount of training data and the number of parameters, perform better in biomedical applications with higher quality training data, journal articles alike, rather than the common crawl.
Thank you. Thank you both. That's a very good discussion about this topic. And I'm going to shift us a little bit because we just received one new question and I want to make sure that we have opportunity. So online, Jonathan Kinney is here and he wrote a question online. Is it a realistic concern that AI models might enable skirting laws? For example, maybe a health insurance company cannot deny coverage for some reason, but their AI model effectively does this, even with guardrails. This example is to contrive by thinking about it, if AI guardrails may not be able to capture the spirit of law effectively enough. So is it realistic that it might enable skirting?
I don't know of a technology that doesn't enable crime. Okay. Criminal intent is criminal intent, and criminals are clever, and bad things will happen with all technologies, and for that matter, not with technology. You can be scammed by somebody with a telephone, and it doesn't mean we need to shut off all the telephones. Now,
Okay, that's a very good point. We don't have to shut them
there's
all.
some concern that it might facilitate really bad action. So I hang out with some national security people, and the first thing they all thought of is, well, can large language models help terrorists build, germ weapons or something like that? And it turns out that, yeah, sorta, although not that much different than using Wikipedia. All right, so the information is out there. It has to be pretty common for the language model to come up with an answer. You could try and put guardrails around hazardous substances and the like. So if you ask it how to synthesize anthrax, you're not going to get an answer. But in general, it's impossible to fix all of that stuff. And
Yeah.
I don't think it's unique to large language models. It's,
Yeah, not all that different, probably just faster. Thomas or Melanie, do you have some thoughts on this?
On this, no, I don't. I don't see the question.
I'm not going to take a chance of disagreeing with Larry. Better. No, I think that the potential for harm is always there, whichever the technology. The only thing that we can do is, there's the legislation, there's the legal guardrail. Again, if somebody wants to not follow the law, they're going to do it, right? Like, especially if there's money behind, like insurance companies and stuff like that. The only thing that we can do, and to go back to the discussion we had earlier, is understand why this happened. Understand if we're using open technology, we have a potential of looking inside and understanding where did that data come from, what did the algorithm do, and why did it draw that conclusion, and can we do better, maybe safeguarding the data or modifying the algorithm. And I think money is a big factor, and even in general in open source, Larry said we need to be patient and stuff will catch up. But for the open source community, for the open source software we all develop, what's working is we can reuse the software, it saves us time and money. So there's a notion, I think, of incentive, why do we want to do that? And where is the incentive gonna come from? So if it's about not doing laundry, yes, sign me up. There's that little robot in my hotel that apparently does room service. So that's clearly an incentive of saving somebody's the effort of having to do room service and going to interact with people, and who wants to interact with people? But there's a notion of when we're talking about higher level tasks, and we're talking about medicine, human health, insurance, and law. How much do we want to trust AI, and how much do we want to be patient and wait for stuff to happen? How much do we, as an open source community, want to drive the development because we think that's where we need to go?
Yeah.
I want to bounce back on the legislation aspect. I think legislation works very well when we all agree that it need to be contextualized. Legislation need to be contextualized and that is what's happening now. A lot of legislation in place trying to fix the issue of biases and so on are more global legislation, and this cannot really work for each context, because something that you think is a problem for our context here in North America is not it's not a problem in Africa, for example. Last time we had a project on breast cancer and tried to work with an algorithm developed here, but the data used to train this algorithm was data from America, US specifically. And when we tried to test this algorithm with Cameroonian women, we don't have the accurate results, And the first thing is that we are lacking relevant data coming from our context. So when we try to start collecting data in hospital, but our gun stops because even if we want to collect data, we have to go against the data privacy and so on. That is very well set up in US, for example. So I think it's an issue, and for in order to have this application or this algorithm be relevant for our context, I think collecting data is the first thing to do, even if it's prohibited the way we wanted to do it is prohibited in US, but in Cameroon, for example, it can be okay and it can help us improve the algorithm based on our needs. So the regulation, sometimes we need to, I think we need to contextualize it.
Can I ask a question
Thank you, Thomas.
to the audience? So, we're talking about regulation. And there's regulations that say, you're not supposed to use ChatGPT to write your grant, or you're not supposed to use ChatGPT as a co-author on a manuscript. And, there's a bunch of funding agencies that have come up with regulations saying you shall not use large language model to do A, B, and C. How realistic do you think that is? Do you think it's something that can be prevented? Who's used generative
Prevented
AI?
or shepherded through, right? Adapted to either option?
There was a lovely paper that NIPS did, right? I'm sorry, NeurIPS did on looking at language model use in the last NeurIPS conference. And they use there's some words that show up in language models that are uncommon outside of language models. Delve is the one that's most well known. And so they looked at the presence of those words in abstracts and reviews. It was nice that they did it in a way that was non-judgmental. It was really trying to, couldn't identify anyone in particular. Sometimes people use the word delve and it wasn't a language model. They really weren't trying to do any sort of enforcement, just gather data. And there were a couple of interesting things about it. So there was a larger number of reviews that looked like they came from ChatGPT than papers. Okay, so people are being fairly careful about the papers. There were some papers that looked like they had ChatGPT signatures. And then they looked at the characteristics of the reviewers to see were there anything they could find that would identify the kind of person who would do that thing. And it turned out the demographics were useless. The thing that was most highly predictive was that the review was submitted in the 2 days before the deadline.
Oh my word.
So I think we need to recognize that there are pressures on people, and that sometimes those pressures will drive people to do things that we wish they weren't. And I think the appropriate reaction to that is to try and acknowledge and provide alternatives, extensions to the deadline, things like that, that address the problem sociologically rather than technically.
Yeah, I personally also feel that there are opportunities to actually do this in a way that you can incorporate and leverage the power what the LLM can give the student and help them shepherd their work through it. I actually encouraged my students. I mean, if they wanted to use it, I was not going to stop them from it, but we gave them guardrails on what kinds of things they could do. Sure, write your bullet points, but don't give me your entire paper done with it, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. So personally, I'm aware of the use of what I thought was a clever use of ChatGPT in an undergraduate context, which was a series of essay prompts, right, for the students to write papers or essays. And along with the essay prompt came the response in the exam, came the response from ChatGPT. And then the question was, what's right and what's wrong with this? And tell me what it's missing. And I thought that was a lovely way to go about doing it. It doesn't work in all contexts, but it worked in some.
Yeah.
And then there was a paper that I just saw, came out in the last few days, looking at the use in high school classrooms. And there it was disastrous. So there it really seemed to interfere with learning. So students were allowed to use them. They used them. They discussed it in class. And then when they took the chatbots away and did exams, they performed less well than students who hadn't used them. So I think that's a cultural environment. We have to encourage students to use their critical thinking, to not just, take the output and copy paste, all that sort of stuff. We have to develop an ethos around how we're going to continue to be good educators with the presence of these things in the world. We did it with calculators. We could do it with language models.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Please state your name before the question. Thank you.
Yeah, John Hill. I wanted to ask, to the earlier point about bias, I've seen bias and sort of erroneous logic and things like this framed in the models in terms of something to be corrected, in terms of adjusting the training data, making it more representative, things like this. I wanted to hear the panel's thoughts on whether the models themselves could be sort of a model or studyable system for the training data. So can you sort of flip it around and say, oh, we've got an LLM, it's trained on this data set. We don't know all the biases and thoughts on that, but now maybe we can poke this system a little bit and sort of figure out what's going on. Has there been much work in that direction?
Who wants to answer that?
It's an interesting idea. I'm not aware of anybody who's done that. Are you? Is anybody? I mean, you could use it especially if you smaller ones, right? If you had more limited training sets, you could imagine using it as a summarization of the training set and say, you know, it's sexist or it's racist or something. I think it's pretty clear that they are. If you just take the common crawl, there's a lot of really bad stuff in there. And you can kind of use the outputs of language models as a weird characterization of the bad stuff on the internet. I'm not sure how valuable it is, but maybe you could do that.
I have seen some questions online that gyrate about the same theme. If you have some bullet points or pointers towards what are some good open source LLMs that can be used, should we please list them? Is there an open model that has been trained on PubMed? Could we please list them? So if you have knowledge of these, I would be happy to
The
aggregate
Hugging Face
them.
leaderboard is the best place to go.
Hugging Face?
Hugging Face. So Hugging Face has a leaderboard that has all kinds of performance statistics, and it's got metadata that describes how open the models are. Is it weights? Is it training data? What the training data was. Hugging Face is a wonderful resource for that stuff.
Thank you. Please state your name before the question.
Matthew Lavalley-Adam, University of Ottawa. I was wondering about from an environmental perspective, the open versus closed models. So you would think that open model would help reusage and then for less retraining and therefore less of environmental or energetics impact. But with the open model, also create an environment where there'll be a plethora of models that will be trained and therefore an explosion of the environmental impact of the large language models. So I don't know if there's any studies trying to anticipate in the future the environmental impact of all of what we're doing.
That's a really interesting question, something we've started to think about. So I don't have an answer, I'm sorry. But I was talking with Alex Bateman, who's also here at the conference, and they've recently published on the green principles, which is exactly around studying environmental impact of the computation we're doing. So I don't know, but we'd love to look into it. I think that's a short answer.
So Maya, you have some thoughts on this, or Andrew?
I have no data or no knowledge of it's a fascinating question.
I think in principle, the open models are, this is true for open source software generally and open things generally. We tend to be the poor cousins.
Right.
Okay, we have less money than the closed folks for a wide variety of reasons. Not all of them good, but some of them make sense even. And so we are more resource constrained than the closed guys. And so I think we will probably end up using less electricity and water and the like just because we can't afford it. That's not it's kind of like why New Zealand is such a low pollution country. There's no people there, all right? It's not like the people are any better than anybody else. There's just so few of them. And so, maybe we will have less of an impact because of that. Other than that, it's hard to see much of a difference. I think, technically some of the innovations that have reduced use have come in the open world. Right. So the needle in a haystack hypothesis, can you go back once you've trained a model and extract a submodel from it that is as performant but much smaller? That came out of the academic world, to the open world. A lot of the stuff on efficient training and things like that has come out of the open world. Although, maybe Google or OpenAI have efficient training things that they haven't published on, who knows? But just because of the overall big picture, I think the open folks are less likely to be environmentally destructive than the closed.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to take the last few minutes to redirect us into the direction of thinking about the concerns with any privacy concerns, thinking about the massive amounts of data, the possibility that there are linkages across these data, whether re-identification is a problem. And I'd like to get your thoughts on Are you concerned about it? What could we do about it? How can open source models help us? Who would like to take the floor?
I can start, I think. Yes, we are all concerned about this issue related to privacy and so on. And but I think technology is evolving, it's not stopping because we are concerned about things like that. But what we have to do is to anticipate, I think, and education is something that I believe is very useful to tackle this issue, to anticipate on the impact of all these biases on our society. And education is not only the formal education, but even if I believe in the formal curricula, we need to include this kind of critical topics, even in the IT trainings and so on. And we need to train them to work in interdisciplinary team, because so when people are developing their solution or their algorithm, sometimes they used to work close as a close community of IT developers, something like that. But they need to start working with social scientists, anthropologists, environmental scientists, and so on, so that they can ask the right question. And I think that is only how they can fix at the technical level the question raised by this researcher from other domains. So I think, and I believe in long-term education. I think patience, again, as you said, is very important here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll echo that. That was where I was going to go too. I'm not concerned about privacy per se. I'm concerned about people being savvy enough to make their own decisions about the privacy. Like, when I was polling my lab with the various scenarios, I mean, and I consider, my lab to be, among people who are most informed about the uses of and the sort of implications of data sharing. And there were some people who were definitely, oh my gosh, I would never, throw my data in that. And there were people who said, yeah, throw it all in. I want personalized, recommendations, and to do that, right? And I don't think there's a right or wrong choice there, but making sure that people are making that choice in an informed way, I think is key. And and that's, I think, a challenge.
Thank you for being here. I'm going to disagree with you again. I think privacy is a huge problem here. First, because of the thing I raised a couple of minutes ago about advertising. All right, advertising is more effective when it's personalized. And so, if the way that these companies are going to win, make a return on the investment of billions and billions of dollars, not only are they going to advertise, they're going to advertise with every bit of personal information they can find about you. Okay, so I think we really have to worry about that. Second, there's this wonderful, I don't know, I'm going to make it a poll. Who knows about Wild Chat? Oh, almost nobody. So Wild Chat is a big collection of prompts that people have entered into large language models from open models. It's fascinating. Okay, people upload the most ridiculous personally identifiable information in their prompts. Okay, they had to actually, before they released Wild Chat, they had to go through and try to identify PII and redact the names because they were afraid of doing harm. All right, and you look at these things, and people give their medical history and all this personal information about themselves in an attempt to get an answer. Of course, all the companies, by the way, when you check that little I agree box, say that they can harvest that for whatever use they want. So when you're typing that into a proprietary model, you've lost it. I think the only hope we have for a privacy-preserving language model is an open one.
But I mean, just to push back
gently as well.
How much of that is education, right? I mean, suppose somebody were, really, right. I mean, wasn't getting had a rare disease, wasn't getting good, support from their doctor, whatever, and wanted to put that in, right? And I agree with you that, terms and conditions, of course, are famously obfuscated, and, we all just scroll through mountains of text and hit the box at the bottom, and that's not a great system. But the idea that some people would want to consent to that being harvested and used in ways, in products that then might come back and serve them, that's not a ridiculous prospect, right?
No, I'm not arguing that people shouldn't be allowed to do it. I think that what we do need to pay attention to is what others do with that information. So just answering the question, if I put in all my personal information, I get an answer back. I don't see any problem with that. Harvesting that and using it to sell me shit is a little more problematic. Harvesting that and using it to deport me or put me in jail is very problematic. And so I think we need to worry about, my favorite question about AI of all kinds, and really technology of all kinds, is not what does it do or how does it do it, but to whom and for whom. Okay, that's what we need to think about in regulating privacy.
Thank you. Some more thoughts, Melanie, or?
I don't know if I'm agreeing or disagreeing with Larry. I'm a little bit scared.
You don't have to. You don't have to.
No,
We're
so-
going to wrap up.
So thinking privacy as a principle is great. We're like, let's preserve, in particular in the biomedical context, right? It's important, there's confidential, controlled access, human information. But what I'm more concerned about when recently we were talking with my team about privacy and, are we allowed to put the data in that environment versus that environment? How do we make sure we have the right security and safety measures? I'm more concerned about the harm versus benefit of what's happening to the data. So I'm working with patient data and people who have had cancer or whose family members have had cancer. And when you talk to the individual, the participant, they say, I want to share my data. I want to take my whole genome sequence information, push it on the web, anywhere. I don't care. I want you to use my data as much as you can. And I want to get the best treatment derived from my contribution to science. And when you tell them, oh, wait, we're going to have to maintain your privacy, there's regulatory challenges. We cannot actually send data from Europe to the US. We're like, but why? It's my data. I told you, I want you to do it. And so, I think the privacy is important. And the harm that could come out of it, I don't think we quite know today. Larry points out, maybe today we cannot use that information to deport people. Maybe in 6 months we'll be able to. So there's stuff that we know today, there's stuff we don't know. I think we need to consider the benefits and the potential harm. And to go back to Andrew's point, somebody a couple of years back was saying, has the privacy boat already sailed? Because all our data is already out there, right? Like we've all posted on Mastodon and Twitter, the program information is online, how many of us have Facebook, LinkedIn accounts. So, the privacy boat has already somewhat sailed. So there was a movement saying, let's just overwhelm it. Let's just release everything. It's already all out there. We're going to submerge them with amount of personalized data, and people are just not going to care anymore. So I don't know. I think harm versus benefit. Where do we want to go?
Thank you. Well, the last one's a rapid fire as we come to a close then. I know this is a general question, but think generally about it and just yes or no. So do you think open source models for AI/ML, open source informatics to be used in the context of bioinformatics, are they a game changer for our field? Yes, no?
Game changer? We've been doing it a long time. It's important. We got to keep doing it.
Okay, yes.
Yes, for me.
Yes, okay, good.
25 more years of BOSC.
Well, thank you so much.
By the way,
Let's give them
we have, I don't know any other place to make this point, but the automatic transcription machinery that has been used to do transcripts of us speaking live spells BOSC, BOSQUE. And I think we should adopt that acronym and figure out some acronym to go with QUE instead of conference. No open source. No.
Maybe more.
But the forest thing is beautiful. I think we should really go with BOSC.
There you go. All right. Well, los bosques or whatever it was on the transcript should forgive us. Thank you so much for being here. Let's give them a round of applause.